Hello, OIS podcast audience. My name is Rob Rothman. I am going to be your host for this discussion today. I've just been told by Craig Simak that everybody pretty much knows who I am already, so I shouldn't waste time introducing myself, but too bad. It's the sort of thing that I do. But for those of you who may not know me, I am a clinically practicing ophthalmologist. I'm a glaucoma specialist by training. I spend about 50% of my time taking care of patients, both medically and surgically. And the remainder of my time is spent running InFocus Capital Partners, which is an ophthalmic-specific venture capital fund. We just completed the investment period for our first fund. We have 13 assets spread across the entire spectrum of ophthalmology, including device, drug, technology, AI. And we are currently actively supporting the progression of those assets. One of the things that I get to do for fun is hosting OIS podcasts, and today's discussion should be particularly interesting, as I am happy to introduce Patrick Tresserras, who is the co-founder and CEO of Enerva Pharmaceuticals. And I'm going to let Patrick do most of his own introduction, but he is currently involved in trying to identify technology that will help one of the most underserved areas of ophthalmic therapeutics, in my opinion. So with that as a backdrop, Patrick, welcome to the OIS podcast. Really great to have you here today.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the opportunity to explain my story and about Enerva also.
So, Patrick and I have had an opportunity to speak for a while. I've gotten to know each other a little bit. And Patrick's got a very interesting story, and one that I think is going to be very informative for young entrepreneurs who may choose to listen to this podcast about the process of how you get things done in a relatively efficient way. And I'm going to let Patrick give you all the details. But in addition to what he's got going on at Enerva, I think there is a real opportunity for people to learn how to start, build, propagate, and exit a company successfully, which is not something that's very easy to do. So, Patrick, I think it's great for the audience to hear a little bit about you. So, a little bit about where you came from. I think that there are people who listen to these who say, I want to get involved in ophthalmology at the startup level, and how do you do it? So, can you take us a little bit backwards in time and tell us sort of, where you grew up, what your interests were, educationally, how you ended up, where you ended up. I know you have a chemistry background. Sort of just let people have a general overview of that whole part of your life.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I am from Barcelona, Spain. I grew up in Barcelona. I still live in Barcelona, Spain. I graduated in business in 2019. And after I graduated, I took a sales job in a chemistry CRO. In this job, I realized I started having a lot of contacts with scientists, and especially in the Faculty of Pharmacy in the University of Barcelona. And I realized that there was a lot of innovation in health centers, universities, academia that could potentially be transformative product for patients, but for some reasons this innovation or these projects were never taken into the clinic for different reasons. Maybe the scientists were they don't have the interest of becoming an entrepreneur or have had the time. So then I thought, why don't I find a technology that I could license? I could create my own biotech company, partner up with the scientist, and I put basically work, trying to create a team, raise money, and basically develop this academic idea or project into actually a drug candidate, and take that and transform that into a product for the benefit of patients. So that's how I started with Avizorex in 2013. 4 years after I graduated in business, I started looking for technologies, and for patents. And I felt like that ophthalmology was a perfect area because it was not so crowded like other therapeutic areas like oncology or other areas where it is more, let's say, challenging to have or to get a differentiated program. And secondly, as a non-scientist, I understood the mechanism of action, or the scientist knew how to explain me the mechanism of action, so I understand it. And both things, made me comfortable to just move forward and create the company.
It's interesting. Not to belittle that comment, but people sometimes ask me how I decided to become an ophthalmologist, and I said, well, because ophthalmology is easy, right? I mean, ophthalmology, you basically look at the structure and you see what's going on. Dermatology and ophthalmology, those are the two areas where you can physically pretty much see what's happening. Otherwise, it becomes very challenging, right? So I know that's sort of comical, but the reality is that, right, ophthalmology is an excellent target because endpoints and disease states are usually clearly visible, and they're very direct ways of measuring things, usually in a non-invasive fashion. So I agree with you in that regard. Part of the, I think, interesting part of your story is that you worked for a CRO, right? That was what you did initially. So do you think that you developed a significant amount of your basic science understanding from your time at that CRO? You learned a lot about chemistry, compounds,
yes.
molecular structure,
yes.
things like that. So that was invaluable to you would say, in understanding the science. You can't just,
yes.
I mean, the point is you can't just be a business person and think that you can understand the science of pharmaceutical therapies.
Yes, that company actually had a small lab inside the Faculty of Pharmacy in the University of Barcelona, and most of my time I was there, and I had a lot of contact with professors and scientists that were developing compounds for different indications, PhD students, a lot of innovation. And I realized that no product was going to be, in the clinic or in the market out of this innovation, just maybe a publication or a patent, or, that's why I realized that there was an opportunity there.
So how does that translate into, so I think we should spend a few minutes talking about your first company, because your first company is actually a fairly significant success story. And one of the components that is intriguing to me is how you individually partnered with academia, ended up building a company, and then exiting with that company start to finish. You were involved with the process from the acquisition of the IP all the way through the end. How does that happen? How do you find an asset? How did you find Professor Belmonte, who I know you worked with at Avizorex? Go through that process a little bit, because that's really your first success.
Yes, right. So I think that a key driver of the success was that actually, in this case, Professor Belmonte trusted in me. I approached his university because I found a patent and I wanted to talk to the scientists, and I proposed them maybe to create a company together. I told him that I was not going to take a lot of time from him, but at the end that was not true. But I realized that with this project we had a differentiation in the space of dry eye, because the patent that they filed, the group of Professor Belmonte, was claiming the use of tryptamine agonists for treating dry eye disease as a new mechanism to increase or stimulate physiological tear production, and also provide a pleasant cooling sensation. So as you were mentioning, ophthalmology signs, what's happening, symptoms are quite visible. So I understood perfectly the mechanism. It is a new way to increase tear production in dry eye disease, so that makes sense. And then basically, I think that the base of the story was the personal connection that I had with Professor Belmonte, because if he were not trusting me by that moment, nothing of that would happen. I was young. I did not have a really strong track record. I was not financially strong, to put in a lot of money, but what I taught him, it made sense. In my mind, at least, the steps that I needed to take were very structured and clear. Finally, compound, approach investors in Spain, put together a team, especially a person from CMC, because most biotech startups normally lack of industrial experience in CMC, because they are, in most cases, out of the academia and are very focused on the mechanism of action. But I needed, I knew the steps that I need to take, and I put a plan and a team, and we raised funds. But the most crucial thing was, I think, the personal connection with the scientist.
So you had, I have to believe that you understood the process because you worked with a CRO, right? So you understood the process of how you build a chemical product into a pharmaceutical. And that was obviously, integral to your understanding of what was going to need to get done from the perspective of being a startup founder. But I want to go back just 1 second to how you identified the particular asset that you identified for Avizorex, because I think that's the step. There's an opportunity for these podcasts to have an educational component for people who might be listening and thinking, I want to get involved in an ophthalmology startup and I want to start a company, I have a great idea. How did you figure out that this was the asset that you were going to identify? I think that's what led to your personal connection to Dr. Belmonte, was first identification of the asset, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So how does that, just without going through any personal Patrick trade secrets, how did you figure that out? Where did you come up with the idea that this was the product that I think is going to have an important role in dry eye? Because it's that selection process from the entire compendium of available IP to license in the world that I think is the one that's most overlooked. How do you find that asset?
I spent a lot of bedtime checking iPad and reading literature about dry eye and ophthalmology. But when I decided, okay, I will find an asset. I tried to avoid therapeutic areas that are or were very crowded with a lot of potentially breakthrough treatments out there, and where differentiation it was more challenging. And I tried to avoid assets in oncology, in a different and in other crowded therapeutic areas. And I like this one because there was not a high degree of there weren't a lot of companies in the dry eye. When I realized about this asset, I thought, okay, dry eye, I had to look around, and not a lot of companies were developing innovative treatments, but actually the market was huge. So I thought, okay, maybe here we have a potential good one. And then I understood the mechanism, and I understood how this mechanism relates to the pathophysiology of the disease. So I made a very quick connection on that. And then I just contacted to the university, and the TTO from the university told me, okay, you don't have a lot of experience, but we will ask to the scientist what he wants to do. And he wanted, in this case, Dr. Belmonte, to get to know me. I went to Alicante by car, and we had a first meeting. And in terms of science, of course, I trusted on his work, and on what he was explaining, and the potential of this product, and he trusted me in terms of seeing in me the capability of building a company, raising money, putting together a team, executing the project, and that's why it started.
Right. So the bullet point for anybody who might be interested in the process is that you need to be educated, right? You have to educate yourself. If you have a particular interest in an area, you basically learned everything there is to know about dry eye, about the known mechanisms of action, and then you found an asset which seemed like it would make sense in treating one of those pathways and resulting in a therapeutic benefit. So you can't, it's critical to understand not only chemistry, but pathophysiology and, clinical science with regard to the disease state that you're investigating, right? That's what you did. You basically taught yourself about dry eye.
Yes, right.
Okay. Fascinating. So tell me about what happened at Avizorex. So you partnered with the university, Dr. Belmonte, and you co-founded that company. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then how did it go from there?
We had a mechanism, we had a patent, and then we started. I started to, and that's a recommendation for new entrepreneurs to enroll in networking events, in entrepreneurship programs, because through these programs you are able to develop a lot of connections in your given local ecosystem, let's say, and then we realized that we needed a lead compound, okay, because in the academia they were working mainly on the mechanism, but we needed to look for a compound that was really adequate for the proposed indication, and we identified a compound with the collaboration of Professor Belmonte group at the university. And then I talked to a lot of people, advisors, and we put together a regulatory plan. We figured out what studies we needed in order to file an IND. And we had a plan, we had a budget. We get a person early in the company that was coming from pharmaceutical development in ophthalmology for a lot of years, and that was the CMC part. So we knew how to develop the product, how to formulate it, and then we just started talking to potential investors. And about 1 year after we created the company, one venture capital firm from Barcelona, Aerie, invested in the company, and then we just started. We had a small office in the Barcelona Science Park, and we operated mainly as a virtual CRO, which means contracting most of the studies to CROs or vendors, and we developed the program like that.
So you went through the whole product. You did your preclinical work. All of the initial funding was from, I would imagine, friends and family, and you and Dr. Belmonte, founder, friends and family, typical type of funding.
Yes.
And then you have a single VC that funded the company. Is that correct?
Yes, we had a single VC that funded the company. We then had also grants, and basically we transformed an academic idea into a candidate, into a product, and we took that product into clinical trials in Spain, and we completed phase 1/2 study in Spain in 2019, and we showed that the product was working and it was well tolerated, and yes, we took the project from an early academic idea into a phase 2 drug candidate, actually.
And you had positive data in phase 2, and then Aerie came in and bought your company.
Yes.
So the exit was to Aerie, and that process, that entire timeline from the time that you identified the product to the sale to Aerie was how many years?
was 6 years. We founded the company in 2013. In 2013, and the company was finally acquired by Aerie in 2019.
Fantastic. So, that falls right into the typical timeline that we explain to investors, and in focus that, venture capital takes 5 to 7 years in general. And, you sort of fit that. And I think you probably did it a little bit faster than some others based on your own experience as a prior member of a CRO. And having academia behind you. But it's a fantastic story. And I think Aerie is completed phase 3 trials at this point, I think, or they're doing
the product is moving to phase 3 trials.
Basically, right. So I know Aerie
they completed the phase 2B study, yes, a few months ago, right. And the product is advancing into phase 3 studies.
Correct. So hopefully Aerie will have some positive news from that. So then what happens? So you have this successful exit, you make oodles and oodles of money, you're hugely successful, and then we have COVID, right? So
yeah.
So we have COVID, and you, like many other people your age, had a COVID baby, right? So that was
yes.
Right. Why not have another kid? We're sitting around doing nothing. Might as well repopulate the planet with some good quality people. And then. So tell us how Enerva starts. Where does Enerva come from? Because that's what you're working on now. And I think we want to get people exposed to this company, which is fascinating science. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. But how do you get started with that?
Yes. So as you said, after the company was acquired by Aerie in late 2019, COVID came and everything stopped in 2020. And I had my second kid, and I dedicated to my some time to the kid, to myself, to the family. And then in 2021, I started looking, okay, what I do now, okay, and I started to looking at different opportunities and thinking about what to do. And basically, I decided to be back again in ophthalmology, in ocular surface, and that's why. And one day, Professor Belmonte called me. We had one of our regular calls, and he said, "Patrick, I think that we potentially have a new project. There is a mechanoreceptor that was discovered by the scientist that won the Nobel Prize last year in 2021 in medicine or physiology, Professor Julius and Professor Pataputian, and that receptor is basically the sensor for touch. Is the basic ion channel for touch, for detection of touch. And they did some experiments in Alicante, in the Alicante Neuroscience Institute, and they found that this receptor, piezo2, was actually in the cornea, and that was modulating or mediating the mechanical pain in the cornea. But they were working or pain associated to mechanical irritation, and that the inhibition, they suggested that, and they published a paper and they suggested that the inhibition of these channels may be a good therapeutic strategy for ocular pain. But they had no product because they did a publication, they were working in knockouts, and that is when I jumped in the project in order to find a product to target this receptor. And okay, Carlos told me if we could develop or find a molecule that could blockade piezo2, that would be an excellent idea for treating ocular surface pain. And then I started looking to, I tried to remember what I did in 2013 and to apply it again some years after that. And we started looking at different possibilities of compounds to modulate this receptor, and we ended up licensing a patent application from a US institution that is covering the use of this, our lead candidate now at Tinerva for ophthalmic indications. And we basically are intending to treat in a selective way pain of the ocular surface that is associated with or comes from mechanical irritation.
So it's interesting. So fresh off of a Nobel Prize where the basic award comes from the identification of this piezo-2 receptor that you mentioned, and it being a touch and pain receptor. And the presence of this receptor in the cornea is really what stimulated your interest here, saying, hey, if this is a pain receptor and a touch receptor, then obviously if there's a way to block that, then we can get some analgesia. And again, I think that the reason that this is so fascinating to me is that, you know, based on at least what's going on in the United States with regard to the opioid crisis, and I imagine that this is happening in other parts of the world as well, that there is this interest in identifying novel mechanisms to treat pain that are non-opioid based, right? I mean, that's what the governments want. That's what industry wants. People want these non-opioid pain medications. And you and I have had this conversation already, but it's fascinating to me that the single most sensitive part of the human body, right? The cornea, and it's what year is it? 2022 at this point? And we don't have a single approved product for ocular pain, except non-steroidals for after cataract surgery, which really isn't for significant. I mean, we all know that non-steroidals have that indication, but they're not real great pain. You can't use a non-steroidal for somebody with a corneal abrasion and expect that they're going to be pain-free. So the point is we have this incredibly sensitive structure, which is the cornea. It's impacted substantially by dry eye, and we try and treat the underlying disease, which makes sense. We have no way of relieving the pain.
Yes.
So here you now have this research which says, well, we may have the receptor that's responsible for that. And you go out and you find an asset that can block that. Is that correct? Did I have summarized that correctly?
Yes, you did a perfect analysis. I think that it is it's about developing a very selective drug that is able to reduce pain, but keep the eye sensitive. That is the big deal in ocular pain.
Right. You could just use tetracaine and just numb the entire eye. That will have pain, but then, you know, people could shove a nail through that cornea and never feel it. That's not ideal.
Exactly. And to achieve that, I believe that one needs to have a product with a very selective mechanism of action. And that's what we are intending to do. We are targeting mechanical irritation, and within mechanical irritation, those conditions from the ocular surface that relate actually with pain and pain from mechanical irritation. That could be contact lens discomfort, that is our lead indication, and corneal attrition in dry eye disease, because patients with severe symptomatic dry eye feel as painful the normal movement of eyelids. So our product candidate could be potentially treating selectively these symptoms, as well as contact lenses that are actually an external stimulus that at some point produce allodynia. And what it has been demonstrated by other scientists is that, and regarding piezo-2, is that mice and humans that are lacking of piezo-2 fail to develop allodynia.
Right.
So we are working on a very selective and elegant way to reduce pain on the ocular surface that is associated to irritation, to mechanical irritation, to an external stimulus that is being perceived as painful for the patient.
Right, but even things that have any neurologic basis for pain would be benefited by this by this mechanism of action, right? So even
we hope so.
Yeah, any neurologic, pain syndrome could theoretically benefit from this technology. And then the other part of this, which I think is fascinating, is that once again, you were able to identify, based on your understanding of the science and the mechanism of action, an asset that you thought would be a therapeutic target here, correct?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, people, I think it's a very, I think, you just sort of say, oh yeah, that's what we did, but that's not an easy thing to do. There are a lot of compounds sitting in academia that are either not being developed or are languishing or are just sort of hanging around, because I'm not sure that universities or some universities are the greatest places for the propagation of products that will eventually be, commercial successes. But yet you've been able to identify yet again another compound. So again, was that just an understanding of mechanism of action and looking at libraries of compounds that are available out there? Is that how that works?
Yes, exactly. I think that there is no secret sauce. It's about doing things and action, as we were talking about. And in the universities and in the academia, there are a lot still of compounds that would be potentially useful for treating certain diseases. But I believe that of course, Professor Belmonte is a recognized neuroscientist and with a long track record in ophthalmology and in pain. But we understood the niche, we specialized a lot, and as we specialized, we are able to identify which assets and what are the needs of the market and the patients, and how the new proteins and the mechanisms that are being discovered out there, how could those be applied in eye surface, actually.
It's fascinating. And again, we get this conversation, as a venture capital fund that's looked at hundreds of companies over its lifetime at this point. I think that people who are not specialists in ophthalmology are don't understand things like dry eye. They don't really understand what the market is for dry eye, how large a market it actually is, and how underserved it is. We basically have had two classes of compounds, right? Artificial tears and cyclosporin have been the mainstays of dry eye therapy, or anti-inflammatory, let's just say. Pathway has been the only one that's been evaluated, and yet there's so much more going on in dry eye. And, affecting both the signs and the symptoms is very complicated. And there's so much innovation being directed towards dry eye at this point that we're hoping, I think, from my perspective as a clinician, that we're going to have some real, great advances in the near future with regard to how to better treat patients. And I think that your company is probably one of the few on the forefront of actually tackling the main symptom, which is pain. So congratulations on that. Where is Enerva right now in terms of its progress? What are you up to at this moment?
We are actually raising our first round of financing, and we are working at this point in formulation work. We also conducted preclinical studies with our candidate that are very promising in different animal models, and we have data. And we are working on formulation, and we are expecting in the near future to start IND enabling activities for our formulation, and to run a clinical study in the US in contact lens discomfort in a few years.
Great. So you're actively fundraising. Which is great. I'm sure that people can reach out to you directly and speak to you in greater detail if they're interested in getting involved. I know that in focus, as we get prepared for our second fund, we will be in contact on that level as well. So we'll certainly be in touch with you when we get towards the creation of that vehicle. But so people can reach out and fundraise. But you've been able to maintain a certain amount of development because you funded the company again through founders capital and friends and family and the ways that things get done. Even though you've been successful once, You still have to go through the same process, which is always the problem when you're doing a new company, right? You have to start all over. But I'm assuming that that's what's going on. You guys are funding, moving forward, propagating, but are going to do a larger raise to support the larger activities that will be required in the next year or two.
Yes. At this moment, we are, let's say, as it is said, bootstrapping the founders, because we understand that we need to show at least some preliminary data that this product works for our intended application, and that this product can be formulated, and we need to have, candidate formulation, some preclinical. But as we develop over time a lot of connections in vendors, in the university, we have collaborators, so it's quite straightforward to us, and everybody is willing to to support, to contribute, to help us with this new project. So everybody is involved, is really flexible and helping. So and we have the capacity to fund the company in these initial steps, and that is what we are doing. But of course, we are looking for more funds in order to do the GLP toxicology studies, and build a team, set up actually the operations of the company, run a study in the US, and we potentially have a lead investor, a local investor. But of course, I encourage any other potential investors to get in touch with us or with me if they want to know more about this company.
Well, Patrick, I again, I just want to say congratulations on your previous success. I'm excited, and again, I think this is something very near to dear to any practicing ophthalmologist or optometrist who might be listening to this podcast, to know that there is some real potential for us to have treatment for pain, which is what most of us have to deal with when we're on call or taking care of patients or covering emergency rooms, where we have no effective way of making people feel better. That's real straightforward. So we're all sort of pushing and for you to be successful. As a serial entrepreneur, somebody who's successfully built and exited a company, I think that at the management level, you're obviously well positioned to make this a success. And again, on behalf of myself and I think the whole OIS audience, we wish you the best of luck and great success going forward. With that, I think we're going to try and wind it up here. Again, thank you, for your work so far. I'm hoping that Aerie finds success with your previous company's product. And again, we're all hoping that Minerva is able to tackle one of the large unmet needs in ophthalmology at this point, which is ocular pain. So to everybody listening, again, thank you. If you feel like reaching out to Patrick, you'll be able to get his information from the podcast description that you have in front of you, hopefully. And thank you for taking the time to listen to OIS, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you again in the future.
Thank you, Rob, for your words and wishes, and for the interview, which was very fun for me to do. Okay, great. We stay in touch. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you for listening, everyone. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the OIS podcast. Be sure to listen in next week as we discuss the latest innovations in ophthalmology with experts in science, medicine, and industry. Subscribe to our iTunes channel so you don't miss a thing. Got a story of your own to tell? Apply to be a guest at OIS.net.